My parents cast me out on my 18th birthday to make room for my pregnant sister. But karma orchestrated a spectacular symphony of justice at her wedding, a masterpiece of retribution that would forever shatter the crystal palace of lies they had so carefully constructed. Let me paint you a portrait of my family's intricate dynamics, a tale where betrayal blooms into justice, and redemption rises from the ashes of broken trust. I'm Deborah, born into a family where I was publicly branded their midlife miscalculation, a label that clung to me like a shadow through the marble halls of our mansion. My father, Michael, 65, is a middle management executive whose backbone dissolved in the acid of my mother Karen's, 63, ruthless ambition. She's a corporate titan whose stiletto heels click like death knells through boardroom corridors as she ascends the ladder of success, leaving shattered dreams in her wake. Then there's my sister Jennifer, 32, 14 years my senior, who has perfected the art of treating my existence with such calculated indifference that Arctic winds feel warmer than her gaze. I was an unexpected arrival that shattered their perfectly curated world like a stone through stained glass. When mother discovered her pregnancy at 45, she initially dismissed it as menopause with the desperate conviction of a drowning woman clutching at straws. By the time medical confirmation arrived with its irrefutable truth, it was too late for what she euphemistically called her preferred solution. My birth wasn't a celebration of new life, but rather a funeral for their meticulously planned existence, a crack in the perfect mirror they held up to society. From fragments of whispered conversations and wine-loosened tongues, I've pieced together that my early days were spent more in hospital corridors than in the warmth of home. Born prematurely with a constellation of health complications, I was a delicate thread hanging between life and death, my tiny form fighting for every breath in the sterile embrace of modern medicine. While mother claimed her meetings were too crucial to reschedule, her designer heels clicking away down antiseptic hallways, my father and Aunt Rachel took turns maintaining a vigil by my incubator, their breath fogging the plastic barrier between us. Aunt Rachel became my guardian angel in those sterile hospital halls, her presence a warm light in the clinical darkness. While mother was sealing deals in boardrooms, Rachel's voice would float through the incubator's plastic walls like a lifeline of love. You're going to be extraordinary, little one. There's more strength in your smallest finger than in their entire world of pretense. Those words still echo in my darkest moments, a lighthouse piercing through storms of self-doubt. Upon my release from the medical fortress, my grandfather George stepped in with characteristic generosity. Declaring our existing home inadequate for 2 children, he purchased a magnificent 5-bedroom mansion in one of Boston's most prestigious neighborhoods. But no amount of square footage could fill the emotional void that permeated those elegant halls. The immaculate white carpets, designer furniture, and carefully curated artwork transformed our home into a museum of affluence where I was the unwanted exhibit, a blemish on their perfect family portrait. I learned early that I wasn't part of the display, but rather an artifact they wished they could remove. School became my sanctuary, a fortress built of books and knowledge where I could escape the suffocating silence of our mansion. I threw myself into every club and activity available, collecting achievements like armor against their indifference. Teachers praised me as such a quiet, well-behaved child, never knowing that my perfect behavior was born from a desperate fear of being a burden, of taking up too much space in a world that had made it clear I wasn't welcome. Each gold star and perfect grade was a silent scream for attention that echoed through empty halls. Deborah shows remarkable potential. My teachers would say during parent-teacher conferences that my mother never attended. Such a shame her parents couldn't be here. They'd whisper to each other, while I pretended not to hear. I collected academic achievements like some children collected toys. Each perfect grade a silent plea for attention that went unanswered. Jennifer's rare holiday visits from college were exercises in calculated indifference. She'd sweep through the house like a perfectly coiffed hurricane, regaling our parents with tales of her wonderful college experience while barely acknowledging my existence. "Oh," she'd say, wrinkling her nose at my room, which had once been hers, "it's so cluttered now. All these childish things." The art supplies and books that Aunt Rachel gave me were mess in her eyes, my attempts at creating beauty dismissed as disorder. I once counted how many times Dad used his favorite phrase, "Not now, Deborah," in a single weekend 17 times. Each dismissal was a tiny cut to my soul, accumulating into a wound that never quite healed. Mom's approach was equally devastating but more expensive, throwing money at problems and hoping they'd disappear. Dance lessons? Yes. Private tutoring? Of course. Actually attending my performances or parent-teacher conferences. Sorry, important meeting, can't reschedule. The morning of my 18th birthday dawned with deceptive gentleness at Aunt Rachel's house, golden sunlight painting promises across her kitchen walls. The air was warm with the scent of her traditional birthday pancakes, topped with fresh berries arranged in a smiling face. A small gesture that spoke volumes about the love I'd been denied at home, each berry placed with the careful attention my mother had never spared for me. "Make a wish, sweetheart," Rachel said, her eyes twinkling with the warmth of 1,000 embraces as she set a single candle in the center of my breakfast. I closed my eyes, wishing for something I'd never had, a family that wanted me, a home where love wasn't measured in square footage and silence. Grandfather George's gift arrived with prescient timing, a new smartphone and a cryptic note that would prove prophetic. Keep this handy and document anything important. Trust me on this, little one. He also requested a live video call, his voice carrying an unusual urgency that made my skin prickle with anticipation. The walk home felt like marching to my own execution, each step heavy with dread. The house loomed before me, its pristine facade hiding the emotional wasteland within. The scent of fresh paint assaulted my nostrils the moment I opened the door, a chemical harbinger of the devastation to come. The house felt different when I returned home that afternoon, the air heavy with the acrid scent of fresh paint and an unsettling silence that made my skin crawl. My heart thundered against my ribs as I ascended the stairs to my room, each step an ominous countdown to devastation. The closed door, I always left it open, stood like a sentinel guarding a terrible secret. What lay behind that door wasn't my sanctuary anymore. My photographs and artwork had been stripped away like evidence of a crime, replaced by walls freshly painted in a soft blue that felt like a slap across my face. Where my bed once offered refuge, an ornate white crib now stood in mockery of my existence. Teddy bears occupied the space where my books once lived, and a nautical-themed rocking chair had usurped my desk's position. My existence had been erased with surgical precision, as if they were removing all traces of a shameful secret. The confrontation that followed played out like a surreal theater production, captured in high definition by the phone still streaming to Grandfather George. My mother's voice, sharp as broken glass. "Deborah, why are you here? Why are you filming?" Each word dripped with the same disdain she usually reserved for discussing failed investments. My father's nervous throat clearing as he explained how my sister's unborn son, the son I've always wanted, deserved the room with the best natural light, his voice trembling with the cowardice of a man who had spent decades bowing to stronger wills. "Leave," they said, the word falling like an executioner's axe. "There's no room for you anymore." My mother's carefully maintained composure cracked when I reminded her it was my birthday, her perfect mask slipping to reveal the cold calculation beneath. My father's fingers dug into my arm as he physically removed me from the house, his grip tight enough to leave bruises, physical proof of their final rejection. My belongings, hastily packed in boxes that still smelled of the attic's dust, waited on the front porch like discarded furniture. The door's final slam echoed through the suburban silence like a gunshot, the sound of my childhood home becoming my first crime scene. But karma, as they say, keeps meticulous accounts. 3 days later, Jennifer's wedding transformed the city's most prestigious cathedral into a showcase of wealth and privilege, crystal chandeliers scattering rainbow prisms across walls draped in imported silk that whispered of old money. Arrangements of rare orchids perfumed the air with exotic sweetness, their delicate petals a metaphor for the fragility of carefully constructed lies. The guest list read like a who's who of Boston's elite. CEOs whose empires were built on handshakes, politicians whose smiles never reached their eyes, old money families who'd known each other's secrets for generations. "Are you sure about this?" I whispered to Aunt Rachel as we slipped into our seats, my heart thundering against my ribs. She squeezed my hand, her quiet strength anchoring me in the storm of whispers our arrival had triggered. "Absolutely," she murmured. "Sometimes justice needs witnesses." Jennifer floated down the aisle in a custom-designed gown that cost more than most cars, its hand-sewn pearls catching light like frozen tears, her smile radiant with the certainty that she was finally achieving the perfect life she'd always felt she deserved. Our parents beamed from the front row, mother dabbing at carefully manufactured tears with a monogrammed handkerchief that probably cost more than my monthly food budget. Father's chest puffed with pride like a peacock displaying borrowed feathers. The reception that followed was a masterclass in social performance art, a carefully choreographed dance of wealth and pretense. I watched from my assigned table in the far corner, beside a decorative plant that had more social status than I did, as my parents worked the room like seasoned politicians. Mother's laugh tinkled like expensive crystal as she shared her joy with society friends, while father held court among business associates, already bragging about his upcoming grandson, as if the child would somehow validate their decades of emotional negligence. "Karen has always had such a perfect family," I overheard one of Mother's friends say. "Everything just so. If only they knew how carefully curated that perfection was, how much pain it concealed." The facade began to crack when Grandfather George rose from his seat near the front. The best man's hand trembled slightly as he passed the microphone, perhaps sensing the seismic shift that was about to occur. The room fell silent, crystal glasses pausing halfway to lips, conversations freezing mid-word. "Ladies and gentlemen," Grandfather's voice carried the weight of decades of accumulated power and influence, each word a carefully aimed arrow. "I apologize for interrupting this joyous occasion, but there is a grave injustice that demands attention. The projector hummed to life like an awakening beast, and my parents' carefully constructed world began to crumble with the precision of a controlled demolition. The video played with merciless clarity on the massive screen. My father's physical aggression, his fingers leaving marks on my arm that matched the bruises still fading on my skin. My mother's calculated cruelty, her words sharp as surgeons' scalpels, the systematic erasure of my existence, all captured in high definition. The reaction in the room was immediate and visceral, a wave of horror that rippled through the assembled guests like a tsunami of realization. Gasps of horror echoed off the vaulted ceiling, the sound of 100 perfect masks cracking simultaneously. Mother's best friend of 20 years set down her champagne glass with a sharp clink that rang like a bell tolling the death of their social status, her heels clicking a staccato rhythm of disgust against the marble floor as she made her exit without a backward glance. "My God," someone whispered, the words carrying in the stunned silence. Their own child. Jennifer's mascara created dark rivers down her cheeks as her new husband's face drained of color. His parents, seated at the head table, were already in heated discussion, their disapproving glances cutting across the room like laser beams. When Mother attempted to interrupt, rising from her seat with practiced poise, Grandfather's voice cut through the air like Arctic wind. "Let me be absolutely clear. I am amending my will. Every penny I possess will go to Rachel and Deborah. Jennifer, Karen, Michael, you are all completely disinherited." The chaos that erupted was operatic in its intensity. Mother's strangled cry of "you can't" was drowned out by the scraping of chairs as business associates fled the scene, pausing only to slip their cards to Grandfather on their way out. Father's face cycled through alarming shades of purple as he watched his professional network disintegrate before his eyes. Jennifer's new husband stood abruptly, mumbled something about needing air, and hasn't been seen since. The professional fallout was a masterpiece of karmic retribution, each piece falling like dominoes in slow motion. Dad's company, spurred by the exodus of key investors who couldn't distance themselves fast enough, launched an internal audit that exposed years of questionable decisions hidden beneath layers of corporate polish. The man who once commanded a corner office now shared a cramped cubicle with wide-eyed interns, his authority stripped away like autumn leaves in a hurricane. His colleagues, once sycophantic in their devotion, now performed elaborate dances of avoidance, suddenly fascinated by their phones whenever he appeared. Mother's career implosion was perhaps the most spectacular, a corporate tragedy in 3 acts. Her reputation as a ruthless businesswoman, once her crown of thorns, transformed into a poisoned chalice overnight. The viral video of her evicting her own daughter painted her previous, tough decisions in shadows too dark to ignore. Clients began canceling contracts with carefully worded letters citing ethical concerns, each one a paper cut to her pride. The corner office she'd fought so viciously to obtain was relocated 3 floors down, where she now reported to someone who had once fetched her coffee, a twist of fate that tasted bitter in her perfectly lipsticked mouth. The social consequences rippled through their carefully constructed world like cracks in thin ice, each fracture exposing the rotting foundation beneath their perfect facade. The country club's board held an emergency meeting that lasted precisely 23 minutes, the exact time it took to draft a letter explaining the quiet removal of their names from the membership roster. Their church suggested a break from committee work with the gentle brutality of a velvet-covered hammer, their names mysteriously vanishing from the donor wall as if they had never existed, an ironic echo of what they had tried to do to me. Former friends performed elaborate choreographies of avoidance, suddenly finding fascinating details in shop windows or becoming deeply engrossed in their phones whenever my parents appeared on the horizon. Their phones, once buzzing constantly with social invitations, now sat silent like abandoned altars to their former status. Jennifer, her perfect life dissolving like sugar in rain, retreated to her old teenage bedroom in our parents' house, a princess returning to a crumbling castle. Her designer maternity wardrobe, once a statement of privilege and success, gave way to department store clearance items that still bore the red tags of desperation. I heard she spends hours sitting in the empty nursery, running her fingers over the nautical-themed wallpaper border, watching the mobile spin above the unused crib like the hands of a clock marking time in a life that no longer exists. The room that was supposed to be her son's perfect beginning has become a mausoleum to their collective hubris. The financial reckoning was equally severe. Grandfather George's threat about the will wasn't an empty one. His lawyers had already established an irrevocable trust benefiting only Rachel and me. The investigation into the misappropriated support funds resulted in their investment accounts being frozen. Even their residence, technically owned by one of Grandfather's companies, was now subject to eviction proceedings. They attempted damage control with increasingly desperate measures, each attempt more pathetic than the last. First came the therapy offers, delivered through expensive greeting cards that reeked of insincerity. Then the tearful apologies, performed on our doorstep like amateur actors who hadn't learned their lines properly. They even attempted to bribe our neighbors to spy on us, their desperation evident in the increasing sums offered for any information about our daily lives. Their lawyer arrived last week with an audacious proposal. They would forgive me if I could persuade grandfather to reinstate their inheritance, the very suggestion so absurd it bordered on comedy. The legal proceedings brought their own form of exquisite justice. The court hearing for Rachel's guardianship and my restraining order exposed the full extent of their manipulation in the harsh light of justice. They arrived in carefully chosen outfits designed to project humility. Mother in modest clothing instead of her signature power suits, her makeup understated for the first time in my memory. Father clutching a Bible like a shield, as if its mere presence could absolve him of his sins. They'd even hired a PR consultant to coach them on appearing contrite, but their performance crumbled like wet paper in the face of reality. Evidence. Beyond the birthday video, our lawyer presented years of financial records showing how they had diverted grandfather's support funds, over $200,000, into their personal investments and Jennifer's trust fund. The judge's face darkened as she watched the footage of my father's physical aggression, even pausing proceedings to ask if I wanted to pursue criminal charges. The ruling was devastating. Full guardianship granted to Rachel, mandatory reimbursement of all embezzled support funds plus interest, and a restraining order requiring them to maintain at least 500 feet of distance. The district attorney's office received the case for review of potential criminal charges. The aftermath has transformed my life into something I once only dreamed about in the darkest corners of my old room. In what is now legally and emotionally my permanent home, Rachel and I have created a sanctuary where love flows as freely as sunlight through open windows. My room, once a sterile guest space, has blossomed into a reflection of my soul, walls adorned with colors that sing of freedom, artwork that whispers my truth, and a whimsical reading nook where fairy lights dance like captured stars. The window seat, cushioned in soft purples and blues, has become my favorite spot for watching sunsets paint the sky in colors that remind me daily of the beauty that can follow darkness. Rachel's morning pancakes have become a ritual of healing, each one topped with fresh berries arranged in increasingly elaborate patterns, hearts, stars, and sometimes silly faces that make me laugh despite myself. Grandfather George drops by regularly, his presence filling our home with the warm security of unconditional love. We've started a tradition of Sunday brunches where we share stories, dreams, and plans for the future. Conversations that flow naturally, unburdened by the weight of expectations or the need to maintain appearances. For those still trapped in toxic family dynamics, watching their lives play out like carefully scripted performances. Document everything, build your support system like a fortress against gaslighting, and never forget that you deserve more than crumbs from the table of conditional love. Blood relation isn't a blank check for abuse, and those who fail to love you properly don't get to define your worth or limit your potential. I've legally changed my name, found my true home, and am finally the author of my own story, not a supporting character in someone else's performance of perfection. As I prepare for college this fall, I carry with me not just knowledge but wisdom, that while karma indeed strikes hard, sometimes it needs a gentle nudge in the right direction, and that the most beautiful gardens often grow in the soil of broken dreams, nourished by the rain of tears we finally allow ourselves to shed. To my parents, who I'm certain are reading this with their usual mixture of denial and impotent rage, I hope destroying your daughter was worth watching your perfect family image shatter like the fragile crystal it always was. You've lost not only the child you never bothered to love, but everything else you held dear. A fitting price for a lifetime of calculated cruelty. Your legacy isn't the social status you craved or the perfect family you pretended to have, but rather a cautionary tale of how the pursuit of perfection can destroy the very things that make life worth living. Thank you, Reddit, for being part of my journey to freedom, for witnessing my metamorphosis from a shadow in my own home to the author of my own destiny. Sometimes karma needs a gentle nudge to deliver its masterpiece of justice, and you all helped me find the courage to be its willing instrument. To everyone who shared their own stories of survival and triumph, you are the lighthouses that guide others through the storms of toxic family dynamics, proof that sometimes the most beautiful chapters of our lives begin when we finally close the book on those who never learned to love us properly.